When I think about articles and videos on improving public speaking, most of them focus on how you can improve your delivery. Like the way to improve your speech is to simply have a better delivered speech. Now, I'm not of that mindset. I'm more of a believer in amazing content makes for amazing delivery. So, one of the things I remember learning in graduate school when I first started teaching public speaking was this idea that great delivery doesn't call attention to itself. In other words, if a speech is well delivered, you'll be wowed by the content and not even notice the delivery. And because of that, delivery is important, but not in the way you might think. In fact, the best delivery advice I can give you is to match your delivery style to the situation. In this video, we'll explore the four most common delivery styles: memorized, manuscript, extemporaneous, and impromptu, and examine when each one should be used. So number 4 is a memorized speech, and this is when you write your speech out word for word. You memorize it, then you deliver it with no notes. And a really good example of a memorized speech is a TED Talk. Now, why would anyone memorize a speech? Well, it's usually because they need to say something in an exact way and have to stick to a specific time limit. And that's basically it. Now, the most difficult thing about a memorized speech is that you have to sound like you've not memorized it, which is basically acting. Most of us aren't really good at acting. That's why most of us aren't very good at delivering a memorized speech. It ends up sounding really fake. And one of the biggest problems I've seen when my students try to memorize a speech is that the audience becomes really uncomfortable. It's like we're waiting for the person to mess up. You know, it's supposed to be flawless, and it's really obvious when the speaker stumbles or says something wrong. So, memorization might kind of be your thing, but I don't recommend a memorized speech in most situations. Just stick to being really familiar with your content. All right, coming in at number 3, a manuscript speech. This type of speech is written out word for word and read by the speaker. Now, why would you read your speech? Well, first and most often, you'll recognize a manuscript speech when you see a teleprompter, and that's what these are. So these are often in situations when the speaker can't risk veering from a well-written, reviewed, and edited script that they don't have time to memorize. Secondly, we reserve manuscript speeches for situations when emotions are running high, like a eulogy, and you're not really thinking clearly. Now, some people are really good at manuscript speeches, and when they read it, it doesn't really sound like they're reading. But in my experience, the key to a great manuscript speech is that it needs to sound like it was not written out word for word. But switching from writing like a writer to writing like a speaker takes a lot of skill. And many of my students who are really nervous think if they write their speech out word for word and basically read it, that they're not going to screw up. The problem is they screw up because they come off sounding like they're reading a paper and not giving a speech. What do I mean? Well, when we write a paper, we insert fancy words, long sentences, and we use proper grammar. You know, the exact things that sound really funny when we talk, and we end up making the speech really difficult to follow. So save the manuscript speeches for the right situation and instead try the next style, which is extemporaneous. Our number 2 and my favorite is an extemporaneous delivery. For most of us, this type of delivery is what we do when we speak in a class or at a conference. The speech is outlined but not written out exactly word for word. The speaker jots notes down, rehearses it so the content and order is familiar, but they don't over rehearse it to the point that it's memorized. In fact, if the speech is given several times, it might sound a little different each time. So why do we deliver a speech this way? Well, look for situations when you have flexibility, when you want to engage with the audience a little bit, but you also need to fit a general time limit. Now, the great thing about an extemporaneous speech, in all of its potential awkwardness and the possibility of mistakes, is that they sound really natural and authentic. And because of that, out of all of these, in my opinion, this is one of the most enjoyable types of speeches to listen to. And now on to our final delivery style, and in my opinion, the most common, an impromptu. An impromptu is when we just wing it. So when is this appropriate? Well, we usually see these when we are at meetings and someone is asked to review their progress or give an update or a brief report. Often the speaker might have an idea that this is coming, but they really aren't prepared with notes. A really good impromptu speech is organized and brief, which takes a lot of skill. You do need to have a really clear head to be good at impromptu speaking. But luckily, most impromptu speeches are about a topic that we are an expert on. But that doesn't mean they're easy. I can remember being at a meeting several years ago when a colleague was asked to update the group on a project. The guy talked for 35 minutes nonstop, and worse, no one stopped him. This is a big no-no. It was horrible and boring. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are giving an impromptu, keep it short, like maybe a few minutes. And if anyone wants more, they'll just ask a question. Now, just to be clear, I have a lot of really overconfident students who try this when they shouldn't. They're supposed to deliver an extemporaneous speech, and instead it's an impromptu. What they're attempting to do and failing at is relying on their charm and subject knowledge, and it never works. They just babble a bunch of unorganized nonsense like my colleague did. So impromptu speaking occurs in a situation when you are not really expected to have a formal presentation planned. And to be effective, it should last only a few minutes and it should be simple. Overall, it's really important that you think about what the audience expects out of the situation before you decide how you're going to approach your speech. And it might seem a little odd to be thinking about delivery before you even start, but the situation kind of determines your plan of attack. So in most cases, you'll probably give an impromptu speech, so keep it short and to the point. You'll probably give an extemporaneous speech, so make sure your ideas are outlined, but don't go overboard prepping and practicing. You might give a manuscript speech, and to make that work, make sure you write like you talk and not like you write. And lastly, if you are memorizing a speech, good luck and practice your acting. So stay tuned for more great content, and don't forget, subscribe so you don't miss a thing.